learn more tools other than barbell and dumbbell exercises. There are far too many people hurting themselves with a barbell doing deadlifts and squats when they would be so much more healthy learning other tools. Why don't you push a sled? Why don't you walk backwards up those beautiful hills you have in England? The ones who are successful in their 70s and in their 80s, you know, I live in a very rural place. I'm in Canada. A lot of people where I live still heat their homes with wood. Go look at the 80-year-old who's out there chopping his own firewood. Big hands. But sit down and have a beer with them. How did you do it? Well, I never pushed real hard. I always had a rest after. I never did two things the same day. If I did a real heavy day splitting firewood, the next day I did something else. I didn't do 2 days in a row. I paced myself. And you'll hear this time and time again. I never got real heavy. Never abused drugs. You know, I see that beautiful girl over there, that beautiful 80-year-old. She's been my girl for 65 years.
Yeah.
Anyway, go look at the patterns, and the patterns will reveal to you. So that was the foundation of the Biblical Training Week. It's not for you, Johnny. It's for me. It's for a guy now. I have a bit of mileage on my body, as most of my colleagues do. I want to play with my grandchildren. I don't want to set any records. I hate getting sore hips, knees, back, hands. I just, gosh, if I can make it out a few more years and really live my best life. So the principles of the Biblical Training Week is for people approaching retirement and really living out the most healthful final years. Do you want me to explain it?
I'd love to, yeah, because I think
so
it's really useful.
I'll put the mechanics to it.
Yeah,
Don't do two things in the same day. So I still split all my own firewood. I have a season for doing things in the winter. I love to cross country ski. I still snowmobile, which I know is a bad thing, but in the summer I kayak, canoe, swim. You know, the simple pleasures, but I never do it to intense levels 2 days in a row, or at least I try not to. So that would be a principle. I look at a day, like say a day I do split firewood. Well, that is a cardiovascular training session. It's a strength training session, and it is a mobility session to pick up heavy logs, drop them, split them, stack them, etc. But after a couple of days, I'll say to myself, have I tested my cardiovascular system? Have I tested my mobility system, which is far more important to me now than when I was in my 20s and 30s. Didn't worry about mobility, didn't need to. I do now. You know, I'm hip replaced. I've broken my hands, I've broken a vertebra in my neck, collarbone. Well, I won't go through it, broken my ribs. Anyway, so I have to take care of these things. 2 days a week, I make sure I strength train. So if I haven't done something physical and heavy, I will come down here and I will do strength and power training. So I won't do a sit-up. My body doesn't particularly like them, but I will do in a Roman chair heavy hip power flexion exercises. So a sit-up challenges hip flexion power.
Yep.
As I get into my 70s and 80s, the biggest risk in my life will be arresting a fall. Fall, protect myself.
Yep.
Big part of that is maintaining hip power. Can you get your hip out in front of you to arrest a fall? Get the center of mass broadened, arrest the base of support broadened, and arrest the fall of the center of mass and pull it back. So I'm making sure I'm doing hip power training, but not with sit-ups. I'll use a better exercise with less risk and more reward, a Roman chair hip flexion. I will do all sorts of abdominal wall isometrics. And, you know, I've happened to measure the man who has the strongest rotational core in the world. Do you think he's doing rotational landmines and Russian twists and whatnot? No, he's stopping twist.
Yep. So it's anti-rotation. Yeah.
Yeah. When he does a landmine, he pivots around the toes. You see how I'm locking my core? But if he gets you in a Greco-Roman hold or grabs you with a neck pull behind and does a drop step and pulls you back, and there's no defense. Or if he was to kick you, he could kick the legs out from underneath you, but watch the mechanic. The hip power snaps the hips down, rib cage and pelvis stay together. That leg comes around in a baseball bat or a cricket bat, takes your legs out from underneath you. Strongest core, most functional core. But he trains in a very resilient way. So 2 days a week, strength train. If I haven't done that naturally in my life, 2 days a week, I do mobility work. And I'm getting to be a little bit of an old man. I'm starting to
kyphotic.
Oh, it's so I am so embarrassed when I get out in front of a group and have to give a speech and I have to talk to myself. Stand tall, McGill. And then 2 days a week I do something for my ticker. But yesterday I had a long bike ride. Our snow finally left 2 weeks ago, so I've transitioned now. I'm into summer sports, but I won't ride my bike today. I can just feel it a tiny bit in my left knee, so that would be silly to do another heavy. So there you go. The seventh day thou shalt not do very much, and that is the day that I just rest my body. I might do a little bit of a walk with my wife or something very low grade, but you know, it hurts me when I see, say someone in CrossFit and they'll post on social media, today was my day off, I just went out for a 5K run. And I just thought, oh my gosh,
that's not a day off. You
know, when they think when they're 40 they're going to be with a 20-year-old body. That ain't going to happen. And they are mortgaging their future to some degree without that rest and adaptation day.
And it's all about, so it's sort of managing this biological cost, managing these adaptation schedules, and that's the sort of takeaway point here. So you said,
can I put a big framework on that and
please
bring
do
it down? A big framework is this. Think of every system that is biological, whether it's an insect or a human or a cardiovascular system or a spine. Every system has a tipping point. Let's take vitamin D as a nutrient, because that's on my mind with the sunshine starting to. Most Canadians are vitamin D deficient. If you are vitamin D deficient, you will have compromised health. If you supplement with vitamin D, you will enhance that compromise to a tipping point. If you take more vitamin D, it then turns into a poison. It's fat soluble, needs vitamin K for absorption and all the rest of it. Otherwise, bad things happen. So there was a tipping point. Everything has a tipping point. So when you are training, we're on a teeter-totter now. The fulcrum of the teeter-totter right here is the tipping point. If you are below the tipping point, you can stress the system. If you don't stress your body, you are so weak, you are vulnerable, sick, and all the rest of it. Your body thrives on stress, but it must be below the tipping point. When you cross the tipping point, you build cumulative trauma. You may not know it, but you are. Etc. All kinds of non-beneficial things happen when you cross the tipping point. So that's what you're doing with your training. You're managing the tipping point. Now, that tipping point in of itself will change. If you're injured, you just lowered your tipping point. You
Yep.
better recognize that
Yeah.
and back off. And so your job in your training philosophy is to move the tipping point
Yep.
and stay underneath it.
Yep.
That's what a trainer's job is. But then you need the discussion of, well, what's your goals? Because the more you push the tipping point now, the more miles are going onto those joints. And again, there will come a point where it's compromising over life.
So with that in mind, say someone has finished their athletic career, say it's advice to Professor McGill at age 35, or you said, you know, the biblical training point, biblical training week wouldn't necessarily be for me, right? In my mid 30s. So what advice would you give for someone who's seeking to maintain, you know, some level of performance, but obviously not necessarily, and is very much thinking about this longevity trade-off, right? This trade-off of, you don't want to be enormous, but you still want to, you know, function at a high level, higher than is necessary to sustain health. But do you see where I'm going with that? So sort of, if you could
I think I do, but my answer is I can't
Okay.
give you advice until I assess you.
Right.
I would need to know your injury history. I would need to know your current level of fitness. I would need to know your training goals short term.
Yep.
This year, 5 years from now, and when you're retired.
Right.
And then I could give you personal advice.
Right.
But I don't think that's your question. I think your question is generic. What would I tell the 35-year-old in a general principle?
Yeah, I don't love the generic questions, but I'm trying to make it sort of relatable.
Okay, well, I'll give you a generic answer.
Okay.
Learn more tools other than barbell and dumbbell exercises. There are far too many people hurting themselves with a barbell doing deadlifts and squats when they would be so much more healthy learning other tools. Why don't you push a sled? Why don't you walk backwards up those beautiful hills you have in England?
Yep.
And what a wonderful neurological trick occurs. You walk backwards, pushing through the knee. And there's a technique to this. If you just do it and your feet are stuck out like this, you'll blow up an ACL ligament over time. So, you know, there is a lot of expertise in this, but do it properly, proper monster walk, walking backwards up a hill. You will have such burn in your quads with such little knee stress that you won't be able to squat anymore. And then walk forwards up the hill, and you will find a whole new thing going on in the back of your pants. Those are called gluteal muscles. Yeah. Because the brain perceived exhausted quads. But these are some of the neurological tricks that we would employ to spread out the stress concentrations for general musculoskeletal efficiency. Right. But so anyway, there would be my general.
No, I mean, it's fascinating. So changing the kind of wear patterns, could that walking up hills be replicated? I'm thinking about people who live in sort of central London or something, with like a backward sled drag, for example, like a weighted backwards, that kind of thing.
Sure.
That's really interesting. And then
obviously, if you're in central London, go get an old tire, throw a chain around it and drag it down your street.
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't need to go to a gym in a fancy sled.
No, I totally take the point. It's a bit like Rocky training in the wilderness. Yeah, that's
some of the best training I've ever seen.